Hello friends, today we'll be looking at a tribe that has both been highly integrated into modern Doman society, living a somewhat Doman lifestyle, yet at the same time where many of them are staying, let's say, humble when deciding to live in their historical manner. A tribe that marks their ancestral lands as the Glittering Basin. Today we'll be looking at the tribe with a vacant, stupid looking stare, but adorable squeaky feet. Today we'll be looking at the Namazu. Yes, yes. The Namazu. A tribe of people who have long lived around the many different kingdoms of Yangtze, but were never really considered intelligent, with them quite literally living and flopping around in the mud and appearing to have no interest in education. Yeah, it's not surprising they were considered little more than animals. Therefore, for a very long time, they were never influenced by any other cultures. That was until 800 years ago, with the rise of Doma as we know it today. But we'll get to that soon enough. For now, here's the things we'll be going over. Their physical characteristics, their culture and society, with the importance of Doman society, the 777 celebrations, their religion and god, and finally, as always, their naming conventions. Let's begin their physical characteristics. The Namazu have the appearance of very rotund catfish, standing upright on two stumpy looking legs. Unless you're this Namazu picture I found while researching this. And good lord, whoever you are, thank you for this. The Swolazu. But yeah, they have stumpy little legs that squeak when they walk. Why do they squeak? We have no idea. They just do, and it's really cute, so that's probably the reason. Fun fact, some catfish in the real world also squeak, such as the Platydorus armaturus, the striped Raphael catfish, that make this sound when they're out of water. The more you know. Namazu faces. With their vacant looking stare with eyes that never seem to look at the same point, the Namazu have a perpetually dumb look about them, and would stare blankly at you if you try to talk to them, making you wonder if anyone is home upstairs. Though they are capable of blinking, they hardly ever do so, which doesn't really help with their dumb look. The most notable feature on their faces is, of course, their whiskers. They have 4 barbels, 2 large ones on the upper jaw and 2 smaller ones on the lower jaw. These barbels are highly sensitive sensory organs. Originally, they were used by the Namazu to quickly detect and locate fish and other prey in even the murkiest of waters when they hunt for food. Today, however, most civilized Namazu effectively use it as nothing more than an extra sensitive nose. But some very few Namazu have trained and honed their whiskers and are able to detect things like underground water, veins of precious ore, or even hidden buried treasure. Really anything they want to look for. From these specific Namazu, nothing can be hidden from them. But again, very few Namazu have the patience and dedication to hard work to achieve this skill, which is very creatively named Namazu detection. Now, Namazu are omnivorous, but prefer to hunt and consume small fish and crustaceans over picking greens. The way they hunt would differ between the civilized bell-wearing Namazu and the wild Namazu. Wild Namazu would detect their prey with their whiskers, then swim and chase after them, catching them with their mouths and eating them raw. basically exactly like how a fish would hunt. This practice, though, often leads to parasite infestations and a much shorter lifespan. The bell-wearing Namazu, on the other hand, would fish using fishing spears or fishing rods to catch their prey, and would always cook their food before eating it to kill off any potential parasites. Beyond that, they would eat greens and grains and effectively have an identical diet to anyone living in Doma. While on the topic of food, fun fact, the Namazu have a, let's say, keen interest in tea. Most of them love the stuff, and some drink a lot of it. However, due to some unique quirk in their physiology that isn't entirely understood, something in tea causes them to become stupidly drunk. Tea to a Namazu has the identical effects as drinking alcohol has to any other race, which is why tea houses in Kugane and Doma have to be very cautious when serving a Namazu customer, lest they want a rowdy drunk fish running around.
You want to help me win a contest, little elf? Sure. Starts with a little drinky pool.
Their skin. Most Namazu are grey-skinned with white underbellies, and likely have the exact same texture as a catfish's skin. And though it isn't definitively said anywhere in the lore, it is highly implied that the Namazu have a perpetually slightly moist and sometimes slimy skin with a, well, fishy odor to them, much like your girlfriend's.
Okay, that's inappropriate.
Lastly, for their physical characteristics, their hands, which are really just incredibly specialized fins, with a really neat lore explanation on how they can hold things too. Inside of their fins, under their skin, are 5 small hidden bones, each of which can move independently from the other to grasp and manipulate objects, which is how they can hold their tools and fans we often see them holding. Basically, inside these fins are tiny hands. With these fins, the Namazu are able to become master-level artisans, creating tools and some pretty amazing works of art. Art that display their culture and society. Oh yeah, great segue. Now, to talk about Namazu culture, it's actually best if we touch on Doman history, since Namazu society and culture would not exist if it wasn't for Doma. Hells, the Namazu themselves would very likely be extinct if not for Doma and its founder, the great general Ganon Rijin, the ancestor to Hien Rijin. Now, there is a lot I can talk about over this one guy, and the stupid amount of influence he had in the region. He unified all the warring clans of Yanxia under one banner. He brought geomancy to Doma, and he shifted a culture that was previously a caste system into one where it doesn't matter what someone's birth or background is. So long as an individual possesses the ability and wisdom to better society, they are always welcomed as equals. And this is how the Namazu went from literally sitting in the mud to equal members of Doman society. Some 800 years ago, the Rijin clan had claimed all the territory on the eastern banks of the One River, and were at war with the unified clans on the western banks. General Rijin approached the Namazu and asked for help. He recruited any that would join him, and used them as messengers and spies. These Namazu would swiftly swim across the One River, back and forth all day, delivering messages and orders between General Regin and his vassals. This allowed him to coordinate his forces to a terrifying degree and absolutely crush his enemies. Remember, this was before link pearls or flying mounts, so the level of coordination he achieved with his forces, thanks to the Namazu, was staggering. And thus, with the help of the Namazu, Yangtze was united, and the great nation of Doma was born. For their help, every Namazu that enlisted was rewarded with a shining bell, a symbol of their deeds as, quote, bringers of good tidings, and all were welcomed as equal people in the nation of Doma. This is why all the civilized Namazu wear bells around their necks. To the civilized Namazu, the bell has become so very important, to the point where they would never be seen without their bells. They are proud of their heritage and history in creating Doma and becoming integral in Doman society, is what I want to say. But in truth, most Namazu don't actually remember the historical reason behind why they wear bells. But it has still become a part of what it means to be a civilized Namazu to them. And it is something unique to them, something distinctly and very clearly Namazu. How do they not remember the history of their bells when their bells are so important? That's because of a cultural quirk they have that only revealed itself in the following generations of Namazu. For you see, the first Namazu in Doman society were those who willingly fought for Doma, those few very hardworking Namazu who want to make a difference. But they are the exception to the Namazu's normal nature. The Namazu's normal nature is being carefree and careless. Why do you think they don't have any history and were just sitting in the mud before General Regin? They clearly have the intellect to make something of themselves, but they just don't care to. With this quirk now revealing itself amongst the Namazu in Doma, they became less and less desired as workers. But funny enough, many actually found themselves being employed into the household staff of incredibly wealthy ruling families and nobility. Now, they weren't being hired because these families thought the Namazu would be useful. They were being hired because these families were trying to win kudo points. The Namazu became a symbol of a noble house being incredibly generous, since they'd offer employment to the least desirable employees. Basically, the Namazu really lucked out, as the Doman elite constantly tried to one-up each other, showing that they're more generous because they were willing to hire even more Namazu. But now, what of the history before Doma? Surely there's something, right? I mean, they could speak the local languages already, and clearly are highly intelligent people, all of which can read and write. Surely they have some history. But no, really they do not have anything. Before Doma, the literal only history they had is that they were in the region, they swam around catching fish with their mouths and eating it raw, dying incredibly young, and just sitting in the mud. They had no leaders, they had no marked territory, they didn't record anything, they didn't pass anything down, they just existed. Which is kind of really sad. Which segues us to the 777, their celebration festivals, and what's going on here. So the Namazu, the Warrior of Light, will mostly interact with is the group of Namazu on the outskirts of the Azam steppe. These Namazu are holding 77 different celebrations commemorating the birth of their tribe. They are also being led by a Namazu named Sugetsu the Enlightened, formerly named Gyufun, who desperately wants to bring about a renaissance of Namazu culture. But in order to do so, he's borrowing traditions from other races and tribes to show how very cultured the Namazu are, but botching most of these traditions or simply creating traditions for the sake of having traditions. I don't think I even need to say anything about how silly this is. But that's all fun and games, and in my opinion, fine, since the traditions they are borrowing from is primarily from the Azam steppe Aura, who are okay with this, since they often go to these festivals and think it's the funniest thing ever, and cannot stop laughing when they watch the Namazu try and perform their traditions. One Aura apparently nearly fainted because he couldn't breathe from laughing so much. But Sugetsu is also trying to rewrite history to suit a more sophisticated Namazu narrative, which, to me, as someone who cares a lot about historical accuracy in real life, is the biggest "you don't f***ing do that," and made me really dislike this fish. In the quest Pilgrim's Regress, he's trying to invent additional history to the Aura site Hakkal, solely for the sake of having a Namazu holy site. A site that quite literally has nothing to do with the Namazu, and has begun to confuse the Aura and could potentially have them questioning their own history. Now, I understand why he's doing this, but you don't do that. Unless you're me, of course, in which case I get the go-ahead to make anything up. It's fine, right? But yeah, speaking of holy sites, let's talk about their religion and god. The Namazu do not have a god. At least not how we understand what a god is. The Namazu instead worship what they call the Big One, who is what they believe to be their earliest ancestor. Not a god, but a fellow Namazu. Basically, the Namazu do ancestor worship. He also has an origin myth, which likely is not an ancient belief, but a story fabricated by Sugetsu somewhat recently. After all, the Namazu don't care to pass down their records and histories, so why would they pass down this one that just so happens to be so very important to the festivals Sugetsu and the 777 are holding? But all gods must have an origin myth, which is likely why the story was made up. So here it is. Once upon a time, long ago, when the one river had just begun to flow, there was born a huge catfish. Day in and day out, this monstrous catfish would chase after fish and gobble them down, never ceasing to eat. He ate and grew until one day he became so enormous that he could no longer chase after his dinner and could barely move in the river. So what did he do? He turned himself to face upstream and open wide his cavernous maw. Thus, carried by the current, fish after fish was swept into his mouth, and the already enormous catfish grew and grew until eventually he was so large that he became wedged between the banks of the stream. In an attempt to break free, he twisted and turned and bit at the tip of his tail, shearing off the end of it, making himself smaller. The tip fell into the stream behind him and flopped around, turning into a little catfish. Yet, even with the loss of his tail, the colossal catfish could not squirm free. The stream was blocked by his girth, and the water behind him ran dry. There was now only mud. Unable to swim, the little catfish propped himself up on his fins and sprouted legs on which to stand. And thus the tail, which became a catfish, became a Namazu. The gargantuan catfish eventually surrendered to his struggles and rose into the heavens somehow. The river, now free from this blockade, suddenly gushed forth once more, and the small waddling Namazu was washed away, tumbling head over fins and carried down by the river, until he found himself on the glittering basin, where he would choose to stay, happily ever after. And that's how the Namazu believe they came to be. Yeah. Moving on, yes. Their naming conventions. Namazu names do not distinguish between male and female Namazu, both using the same naming conventions. Their names are all formed from two parts. The first part is always the Far Eastern word for fish, gayo, and the second part is always a combination of syllables that, from my understanding, often don't have a meaning and just sound good together, such as Gayurai, Gayurin, and Gayushin. But randomly putting together syllables like this does sometimes end up creating actual words, such as Gayufun, which in Far Eastern Domain translates to fish droppings, which this guy is full of. As for last names, Namazu do not have any and only go by their first names. For one fun fact reason, before General Ganon Rijin, Namazu either didn't have any naming convention at all, or had one and completely dropped it, having it lost to history after they joined Doma. Because the entire reason that they even use the prefix Gaio in all their names is to honor General Ganon Rijin. When Rijin was first trying to recruit Namazu to assist him in the war effort, pretty much every single one of his advisors and vassals detested and greatly criticized his decision. They said he was trying to recruit barbaric animals. General Rijin looked at them and quite simply responded, "They can talk, they can think. They are Gyujin, fishmen." So, yeah, again, showing how this guy is so dang important to Namazu history and culture. But with that, we also draw this look at Namazu lore to a close. I hope you enjoyed. Next, we'll be looking at either the Lupin, the Kojin, or the Ananta, as voted by you in the new poll. But having looked at the previous poll, I kinda think I know what's gonna come next. But who knows, maybe all those Namazu votes will flood into the Ananta or Kojin. So you guys should let me know. But for now, goodbye my friends, and have a great day.